Hi, my name is Ben Cook, and I'm Vice President of Laxabanius LLC, a firm that advises companies and governments in complex negotiations, as well as the founder of Red Pill Strategies, a boutique strategy shop focused on helping organizations navigate the many high-stakes challenges they face operating in today's 24/7 digital jungle. While many businesses think of social media as a channel for reach, a place to take their existing strategy and connect with new audiences, we flip that formula on its head. So rather than going from strategy to social, we start with a deep understanding of social media, and then develop approaches that are native to the digital age, informed by data-backed recommendations that help negotiators better understand their online threats and emerging opportunities. In turn, then this understanding should help shape negotiating strategy. So what do I mean by all that? Well, in this webinar, I'll be walking you through a case study using Amazon's failed bid for a second headquarters in New York City, so-called HQ2. If you're not familiar, this proposed project would have provided a total of 50,000 high-paying jobs, a juicy development prize that sparked a high-profile competition between more than 230 cities across North America. In late 2018, Amazon announced New York as one of two lucky winners, splitting the jobs evenly, with 25,000 to Long Island City and 25,000 to a suburb of DC. Amazon felt like it was in a strong position. When it was announced, the deal had widespread local support in New York, including 80% of registered voters in Queens, the borough where the campus was going to be built, a majority of union workers in the city, despite Amazon's somewhat spotty reputation with organized labor, and even higher levels of support among minority communities. Across the board, a statewide majority of every age group, every ethnicity, every political leaning, and all educational backgrounds approved of Amazon's plan. Both the governor and the mayor were vocal advocates, with the governor even joking that he would change his name to Amazon Cuomo if they would pick New York. But somehow, despite this overwhelming support, it didn't take long for a tiny minority of local opponents to emerge as a real problem. Small-scale protests cropped up around the city, but it was online where these voices became especially dominant. Several themes emerged in this anti-Amazon conversation, including broader criticisms about its reputation for being anti-union or mistreating its warehouse workers, as well as allegations that the e-commerce giant damages small businesses and evades taxes. For the HQ2 project specifically, opponents claimed it would put a strain on infrastructure and hike up rent nearby, and they complained about New York giving a $3 billion tax break to an already rich company that hadn't paid income tax in recent years and that was headed by Jeff Bezos, the world's wealthiest man. You can see here a photo that went massively viral of these demonstrators at a particular city council hearing at which the Amazon proposal was under discussion. So when Amazon first learned of these protests, its approach, as summarized in this Bloomberg article about the inner workings of the small, secretive negotiating team behind the deal, was essentially to ignore the problem. Internally, the strategy was apparently summarized as F you or Amazon, because this insulated group was so convinced of the economic desirability of this deal, of positive popular sentiment, and the strong support of all of New York's top politicians, that all they had to do was announce a winner and get to work. Yet, to the surprise of one of the biggest, most tech-savvy companies in the world, this strategy did not work out very well for them. And by the way, negotiations experts call this approach decide, announce, defend, a kind of take-it-or-leave-it strategy that my colleague Jim Sabanius analyzed in a recent Harvard Business Review article about this case. And so as pressure mounted across social media, a prominent opponent of the deal, who had initially been a supporter, State Senator Michael Gianaris, was nominated by the State Senate to what's called the Public Authorities Control Board, a key policy body with oversight over the deal terms that required unanimity among its members to approve the project. This effectively handed veto power to a deal blocker, and so at that point, after repeated public humiliations, the company withdrew their offer, and New York lost out on those 25,000 high-paying jobs, alongside an estimated $28 billion in new tax revenue for the state. So our question here is, how did an unfunded, ad hoc group of amateur online activists defeat one of the most valuable, tech-savvy, well-connected companies in the world over a multi-billion-dollar deal with such strong local support? To begin getting our heads around this David versus Goliath defeat, we're going to utilize a tool from the field of social media intelligence and use it to visualize the universe of conversation around Amazon's HQ2 deal in Long Island City. Although there are, of course, many different platforms we could have examined, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, to name just a few, in this case, our analysis is limited to Twitter network visualization because that's where the bulk of the HQ2 conversation took place. And in future webinars, we'll explore some of those other channels and tools in a little bit more depth. So what you're looking at here is a network graph analyzing Twitter conversation around the time of a pivotal City Council hearing on the HQ2 project. The dots represent individual Twitter users, the lines are conversations between them, and their position in relation to each other is a measure of importance or influence within the conversation. For those interested in the network theory behind this visual, this is called Eigenvector Centrality. It's the same math behind Google's PageRank algorithm that determines what sites come up when you search a term. So if we dive into this graph, the first observation we have is how utterly peripheral Amazon is to this conversation. You can see Amazon's Twitter presence here, encircled in a red dot. And if you note their position within the network, you'll see that the tech giant was almost completely absent on Twitter and had essentially no ability to influence or shape debate, frame perceptions of the deal. It's remarkable, and ultimately this oversight meant that they had no leverage on this vital platform to shape the outcome of their deal. But if Amazon wasn't driving this conversation, who was? Who was shaping the way that New Yorkers perceived this deal? Well, as you can see here, the conversation was overwhelmingly dominated by anti-Amazon activists, specifically supporters of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Their activity has made her one of the most mentioned accounts in this network, even though she herself hasn't actually posted. This is referred to as having high in degree. Now, AOC had just won a shock upset victory over a well-established incumbent Democratic politician in a nearby district. And the coalition of hyper-online local progressives that propelled her to victory was knowledgeable about the area, extremely digitally savvy, and was equipped from the campaign with a trove of social media accounts and connections of supporters just waiting to be activated to oppose a deal like this one. And you can see here various leaders in her camp doing just that. For example, this account is Zephyr Teachout, an author and Fordham law professor popular among the Bernie Sanders AOC crowd. Democratic socialist-aligned influencers like her are the ones engaging every day, sharing the posts that went viral and reached the most people, and playing a pivotal role in shaping how this conversation evolved. In fact, she has the highest betweenness centrality in this network, meaning she is the channel through which the largest number of new users are being brought into the conversation. And this is where it gets really interesting. In this graph, you see a group of Democratic Socialist accounts literally surrounding one user, State Senator Michael Gianaris. He's the one I mentioned earlier, the opponent whose appointment to the unanimous consent-based Public Authorities Control Board ultimately derailed the deal. Now, what's curious about Senator Gianaris is that he was a lifelong moderate, a middle-of-the-road, largely pro-development, pro-union individual. And remember, a majority of union workers in the city supported the deal, despite Amazon's troubled history with organized labor. In fact, in Senator Gianaris' district, State Senate District 12, which includes the proposed HQ2 campus in Long Island City, 77% of voters approved of this project. And so maybe unsurprisingly, the senator actually had been supportive of early efforts to attract Amazon to the city. But after Gianaris saw the hyper-online AOC movement topple another moderate Democrat in a neighboring district, he swiftly moved to the left and began embracing these often largely symbolic, highly viral progressive stands. It got to the point where this lifelong moderate began calling himself the Amazon Slayer, online and in the media. And when you look at this network, it's no surprise why he changed his mind about bringing Amazon to his district. When it came to lobbying Senator Gianaris, this coalition of anti-development, democratic socialist users completely drowned out all other voices online. So this obviously created quite a problem for Amazon and its majority of local support. But before we get into that, I have one final observation to make about this network. Conversation here is driven and defined by these small-scale, highly active users who often have very few followers, but are engaged in this peer-to-peer conversation where they are talking to individuals in different groups across different constituencies, forming the bridges that tie this network together. In network theory terms, these users have high betweenness centrality, but low closeness centrality. In other words, they might not have all that many friends, but they are key to connecting otherwise distinct clusters to each other. In essence, what you're seeing here is the real-time formation of a hostile digital coalition. These users are the ones responsible for the overwhelmingly anti-Amazon sentiment online. But who are they? Well, they are almost exclusively immigration rights activists, like this account, Make the Road NY. But this is somewhat bizarre. On the face of it, this deal had nothing to do with immigration rights. Instead, these users had a separate bone to pick with Amazon over its Web Services Division's contract with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and they believed the company had been insufficiently responsive to their demands. And so even though they had no interest in the specifics of the HQ2 deal, this was an opportunity for them potentially to exert outsized leverage over the company. What this shows is that any public negotiation like this presents a unique vulnerability to activist pressure that might be completely unrelated to the specifics of the deal at hand, but which can become pivotal when focused on crucial individuals or influential decision-making bodies. We're not just talking about good community outreach or social media listening, although both are important for public affairs more broadly. We're talking about this specific small-scale group of users who successfully targeted key digital pressure points like Senator Gianaris, induced him to change his position on the deal, and then lobbied the state Senate for his appointment to the consensus-based Public Authorities Control Board. It was these users and their disproportionately impactful online behavior that led to the defeat of Amazon's coalition with mass local support. And with Amazon's negotiating team absent from Twitter, the company was unable to identify, or at least respond to, the growing influence of these activists until it was too late, much less influence the debate or mobilize supporting coalitions effectively. Look, what's significant about this case is not that Amazon is bad at negotiating. It's that Amazon appears to have been largely blind to the realities of the situation on the ground and online. Despite their year-long media blitz hyping up the deal's benefits and goosing up competition among hundreds of cities to win this prize, it looks like Amazon mostly failed to monitor, or at least to counter, the huge volume of conversation its PR team had generated in anything like a sophisticated way. While the typical explanation for this failure is that Jeff Bezos overlooked the AOC worm hidden in New York's Big Apple, as this editorial cartoon depicts, to us, Amazon's most glaring oversight was its failure to mobilize that broad base of latent local support in meaningful ways to counter the much smaller but more intensely engaged opposing forces. After Amazon announced that it would withdraw from the deal, a huge group of union leaders, local elected officials, and community leaders wrote an open letter in the New York Times imploring Bezos to reconsider. How did Amazon miss this potentially pivotal support before it was too late? This group includes 4 House representatives, many community organizations from Long Island City, the president of the state NAACP, the president of the New York State AFL-CIO, the president of the Civil Service Employees Association, a union with more than 300,000 members in New York. But online, none of these people show up influencing Senator Gianaris. Now, look, hindsight is 20/20. But had we been advising Amazon, it seems pretty clear that at least some portion of this support might have been activated in useful ways. For example, Amazon could have identified influential supporters based on their social media following or networked position in key communities, equipped them with powerful arguments they could personalize and adapt for different audiences, and use top-down corporate communications to amplify these positive voices. Amazon could have identified specific concerns of opponents and moved swiftly to mitigate them. Or on the flip side, they could have employed the same bottom-up tactics used by activists on Senator Gianaris to potentially retain or reclaim his support. In the weeks leading up to his appointment to the Oversight Board, when Senator Gianaris was refusing to even attend the Community Advisory Committee they had set up to discuss this deal, would he really have refused a meeting with labor leaders about the 11,000 potential union construction and maintenance jobs the project was set to bring to his district? And efforts like these could have been augmented with tailored messages narrowly targeted to reach key groups of stakeholders online. This outreach could have highlighted a wider set of implications from losing this deal: lost jobs, lost infrastructure improvements, lost sales tax, even the lost ability for progressive leaders to influence the company over the long term, which was actually a key issue that major New York labor leaders raised after the deal was lost. It's unlikely that Amazon could have changed the minds of the ICE protesters organizing to oppose this deal. But the company might very well have worked with Senator Gianaris before he changed his mind, maybe inducing him to embrace the deal, or at least stay on the sidelines, by letting him hear from someone other than this hyper-online activist minority. For example, working with Amazon, he could have become the city's most visible agent, helping meet the concerns of protesters and opponents, announcing agreements and victories to key digital constituencies. We can't know for sure if this approach would have been successful in the end, but with key decision makers stuck in an anti-Amazon echo chamber online, failure was all but guaranteed. Had Amazon employed tools and approaches like the ones we've been exploring, they might not have been so blind to the support for HQ2 on the ground and online. Performing a quick red team-style audit of their key vulnerabilities and attack surfaces could have helped the company detect these issues before they announced the selection of New York, observe troubling shifts early, and act swiftly to neutralize hostile actors by meeting their concerns, outflanking them, or simply overwhelming them with mobilized supporters. The social media intelligence approach we're talking about could have helped the company act quickly to improve their deal landscape by bringing more pro-HQ2 voices to bear in the negotiation, either indirectly via social media or directly by engaging prominent supporters such as labor leaders who could have lobbied elected officials in the state Senate to have someone else appointed to the Public Authorities Control Board. But armed with a traditional toolkit, Amazon failed to mobilize its supporting coalition in a meaningful way. So regardless of how you feel about the merits and specifics of this project as proposed, there was some form of a deal to be made here. And in the end, Amazon's blindness resulted in everyone losing out on that opportunity. Thank you. And thank you very much for taking the time to walk through this case study with us. As you've seen, these approaches have the potential to be transformative in crucial negotiations. And remember, this graphical network analysis is just one tool out of many such social media analysis tools, and one platform, Twitter, out of dozens of sources for intelligence and influence online. In future webinars, we'll be discussing several additional approaches we've been developing to support our clients facing important or high-stakes deals, including proactively building resiliency across their organizations, and mining sources like Facebook or Instagram for pivotal information to shape strategy in a far more in-close setting. Now I'll turn it back over to Jim to expand a bit more on how we're integrating social media into the 3D negotiation approach more broadly. Thank you.